Welcome to another episode of the Information Addicts Podcast. My name's Cassidy. I'm an information addict, and this is my podcast where I explore information, ideas, and beliefs and try to do these things more responsibly. Today, I have a conversation with Michael. Michael was actually someone who reached out to me after watching my podcast and seeing some of the videos that I had put out on the Randos United channel and some of the other channels that were connected with Paul Vanderklay's community. Michael had actually done a conversation with Paul a while back, which I had actually viewed, and reached out to me after watching some of my videos and wanted to talk about deconstruction and how to do that with this desire of not wanting to lose faith and still being a part of church. And we had initially recorded this and not planned to release it. So this was recorded 6 or so months ago. And after doing some of these conversations with people who are deconstructing and talking about deconstruction, I thought it might be cool to actually release this conversation where we were pretty candid and pretty open about the process of what it was like to deconstruct for ourselves. And, I really appreciated Michael's perspective of trying to wade through what it means to commit to ideas, beliefs, or things in the face of uncertainty. And I just really love the conversation. So I'm glad that he agreed to release it, and I hope you guys enjoy it.
I'll just record it and then we don't have to release it. So don't feel like you have to have to play a part. Just so what's going on?
Sounds good. So I don't want to like completely rehash my entire story because you did watch my video with Paul, but
give me the spark notes.
Yeah, SparkNotes version is I grew up an evangelical Christian. My dad was a pastor. He's no longer a pastor, but what he was when I was young. I just kind of grew up like in a pretty strong kind of like Reformed Baptist type tradition. It was kind of interesting though because my dad was actually a Pentecostal pastor. And then when he left the ministry, we switched to Reformed Baptist. And then I actually went to a Catholic college. And then now I kind of partially attend like a non-denominational church. So I feel like I've been kind of all over a little bit.
All over the map.
Yeah. But pretty much I grew up like in a pretty strong Christian environment, and like faith was always a really big part of my story. I didn't really think deeply about it just because it was kind of like, well, this is just what's true. It's kind of what I always believed. My parents taught it to me. Just like most of my friends were Christians, closest friends. So it was like, this is just kind of the way things are. And then went to college. It's kind of like a little bit of a stereotypical story, but went to college. And probably for the first time, I was kind of like really challenged to think kind of differently about my faith. And just like some of the religious studies classes, like it was a Catholic school, but it's a very liberal Catholic school. And a lot of the religious studies faculty are like atheists or just like people who they're not like traditional Catholic like professors. So they kind of do a lot to kind of like challenge your beliefs and ways of like thinking about the Bible and like all of this. So kind of through those classes, I started to like kind of in philosophy classes, I started to kind of think a little bit differently. And plus just in college, you're just exposed to people who think differently than probably what you were raised with. So it was like one thing kind of growing up my Reformed Baptist tradition is like we kind of I had a pretty like strong stereotype against Catholics.
Yeah.
Like I just like we grew up like I did not really have a lot of respect for Catholics at all. And they were kind of like usually like the butt of the joke, or like just kind of like we just didn't really understand them.
Mm-hmm.
But then going to college, one of my best friends, actually I was best man in his wedding, was Catholic. And we had a lot of really good conversations, and I actually gained a ton of respect for Catholicism just from talking with him, because it was like, oh, that actually does kind of make sense, or like, oh, I could actually see that. It's like once you actually talk with a Catholic versus like just like kind of shooting like throwing darts at Catholic ideas without even really engaging with them. So I was immature at that age. In more ways than one. But anyway, so I went to college and started to kind of be challenged with some of these other ideas. there's kind of some other stuff going on too that was like non-intellectual. So I went through a pretty big breakup, like end of high school, where it was with a girl who I was with, who I was like, to this day is probably the girl that I've been with the longest, and that probably the one I've felt the most like connection with. So that was really hard on me. And then in college, kind of started to also, well, I kind of lived a little bit of a double life in college, because I was, on one hand, I was really involved with Crew, which is like a non-denominational kind of evangelical, well, you know, Rhett and Link, we're Crew guys.
Yeah.
So I was super involved with Crew. Like I went to all the Crew conferences. I went on a summer mission trip with Crew to like go share my faith in Australia. I was like a leader in Crew, so I led Bible studies, and I was like in the leadership team. So I was really big into Crew. But at the same time, I was also kind of wrestling with some of these ideas. There were some other factors, just kind of like college kind of lifestyle, kind of getting pulled into alcohol. And then one of my biggest vices has always been girls. So there was some girl stuff going on that just wasn't great. So that was college.
Yeah.
Ended up getting out of college. And then, you know, I really hadn't gone through a really big deconstruction. I think like the door was like kind of cracked open because of some of those classes, but I didn't really, like I read I always was interested in apologetics and like reading Christian thinkers. I always thought was kind of just very interesting, but I never went fully down the path. And then post college, so I'm 26 now. So I've been out of school for like 3.5 years now. When I got out of school, so kind of a really big catalyst for me was one of my best friends from Crew was like, we were roommates all 4 years. We were pretty much like kind of attached at the hip. Like everybody knew that we loved everything and did everything together. Like probably to this day is probably been the number one most influential person in my life, other than maybe my parents. But he was a really strong Christian too, so we kind of had each other's back a little bit. But he ended up like pretty much completely walking away from his faith after college, which for me was like just totally rocked my world, because he was kind of like that guy that was like, if anyone else, like if anything happened or if anyone else walked away from their faith, it was like he would be like the rock I would fall on. Like he's like kind of like the last person I would have expected that to happen. So, and we were just so attached at the hip that it kind of caused a lot of self-doubt for me of like, man, like this person that was so influential for me, you know, in my own faith life, now claims to not even believe it anymore. It was like trying to grapple with that, like what does that mean, and like what does that mean for me and my beliefs, you know, because I'm like, I can't just rely on him. I kind of have to figure out what I think about it too. So pretty much kind of like through that, and just kind of a lot of those ideas that started in college just like kind of continued to fester. And like the questions that my friend would bring up were like, it was like, yeah, those are really good questions. I don't really have answers to them. So things just kind of started to slowly, there wasn't like a one catalyst moment where it was like it all just kind of came crashing down. I think it just kind of like slowly started to like unravel a little bit. And I just could find myself kind of slowly distancing more and more from faith things. And I would say it probably came to a head kind of in like the last maybe year and a half, where I was pretty involved with my church, like kind of helping out with youth group and stuff. And I just like, I was realizing that the things that we were talking about or the things that we were like teaching, I was like, I don't even really know if I believe this stuff. I was like, I feel like I'm saying one thing because I know it's what I'm supposed to say, but inside it's like, I don't really know if I believe it. So I went through this whole thing where I just pretty much asked to step down from my leadership role, because I was like, it's not fair to me and it's not fair to the youth group if it's like I'm telling them these things and it's like I don't even really know if I believe it. It's just not really fair and not a good situation, you know. So yeah. So so I just kind of started to like kind of ask questions and think a little bit more deeply. I kind of had this moment where it's part of my message to you, where I like went to the library and I like checked out a Richard Dawkins book, which is kind of funny, but it was like it was terrifying, but also really liberating, because it was like I felt like I was kind of like in control, not like in control, but like I almost kind of gave myself permission to like go down those paths and explore other ideas outside of my own, because it was kind of like up till that point it was kind of like, always, you can explore your faith and you can ask questions, but you almost you have to ask the right questions, and you have to like, you can explore thinkers, but you have to read the right thinkers. Don't read Dawkins, don't read Nietzsche, don't read those guys. Like read like William Lane Craig and C.S. Lewis. And I adore C.S. Lewis. I absolutely adore C.S. Lewis.
It's hard not to.
It's really hard not to. He's my spirit animal. But so pretty much I just kind of waited around in that for a while. I was like, I really don't know what I believe. I still felt a lot of attachment to Christianity, and it really did provide a lot of meaning, and there's a lot of connection there, but there was just like, there's so many of these big questions of things that are just hard to grasp. And it was like topic of hell, like biblical inerrancy, like all these big questions just kept popping up. And I was like finding it really hard to find people to talk to about these things, because it was like, and I just, from kind of hearing little bits of your story, I think you probably understand, but it's in Christianity, especially evangelical Christianity, it's just kind of hard to talk with people about these things, because
they don't want to.
Yeah, I could literally talk for an hour just on this topic, but it's just there's kind of that like stigma of doubt, like, don't bring those ideas here, don't talk about those things, or you can talk about them as long as you end up at a place that we like agree with, we don't want you ending up on the other side, and kind of like that type of thing, and just kind of a lack of desire to like engage with ideas outside of kind of Christian thinking. So I was kind of like, I was just getting really frustrated with it, because I was like, I felt like I was completely alone and didn't really know who to unpack the ideas with. And it just kind of felt like there was nobody. And then it was honestly almost kind of a miracle, like stumbling. I was listening to, I got kind of started to catch on to Jordan Peterson, because my friend who deconstructed his faith, he sent me a video of the Sam Harris Jordan Peterson debate.
The first one or the second one?
I don't remember which one, but
did it unravel?
They're each 3 hours.
I listened to the one that was like just a hot mess. I think it was the first one, where it was just like they're debating truth and they're talking on these different levels, and you're just like,
you're talking about the podcast. You're talking about the podcast.
Okay, yeah, not the debate. So that's right.
That is one of my favorite like 1 or 2 hour segment. Like I listened to it just in complete awe that two people that intelligent cannot even get past the first question. Like
it drove me nuts. I was pulling out my hair. I couldn't do it.
Yeah, it was. Oh man, that's great. But anyway, so I kind of stumbled upon Jordan Peterson through that, and I really liked his kind of thinking and thought processes. I was like, he's really onto something. And then through Peterson, just kind of watching videos of him, I just totally stumbled across a blog that Paul wrote about Jordan Peterson and like how Christians should think about Jordan Peterson. And I was like, I just love the blog. I was like, and it was just so refreshing to have a Christian who like actually wanted to engage with something that's like outside of the box a little bit of kind of approved ideas.
Yeah.
So I was like, I gotta check out this Paul guy. So I just like searched him on Google, and then I found like some random video where he was talking about like Rachel Held Evans and like progressive post-evangelicals, which I was already familiar with Rachel Held Evans because I had read her book and kind of heard some of her story and was kind of interested in it. So I watched the video with Paul and I was like, I loved it. I was like, this guy's awesome. Like, I love his way of thinking. Like, I love how he's not afraid to engage with these ideas. I was like, I just want to learn more. So I just kept watching his videos. And then eventually set up a call with him, which you saw my video with him. It was about an hour long. We talked about some of these ideas, and then I ended up joining the Discord server.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like, sorry, that was a little bit longer than Clip Notes, but
no, that's fine. It's helpful. Oh, I'm echoing really bad. I don't know if it's
I have
your
these.
speaker. Yeah, try that, because I'm just like hearing myself.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. I should have just started with these.
You're okay.
Is this better?
Oh yeah, that's much better.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah, Paul's the best. I had sort of a similar experience, although I didn't find him through Jordan Peterson. I knew who Jordan Peterson was. Wasn't like a big fan of him necessarily. I found him interesting, but I didn't really watch the biblical lectures. I still haven't. I
haven't watched him either, actually.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the stuff that I've seen is his engagement with like the intellectual dark web and that sort of political side, which is a totally sort of different Peterson from the Peterson most of the people on the Discord know. But I had a friend, my friend Christian. He actually did a conversation with Paul, and he was I was at an evangelical church at the time, and we ended up connecting at a church event or something, and we started talking about like apologetics, all this stuff, like big ideas. Like the first person I'd seen at that church who like engaged in that way. I'm like, oh, cool. And he's like, have you heard of Paul Vanderklay? I'm like, no. And he's like, well, listen to him. You might not like it, but go ahead and listen to him. And so I did, and I was like hooked, man. Paul, I just love how Paul takes all of these different ideas and synthesizes them together and tries to create a full picture of the world, as opposed to sort of like this narrow view that I think can often a lot of Christian communities can land on when they rely heavily on some of these apologetics resources. Not that I think there's anything wrong with them, but I mean, there's definitely I definitely experienced that same thing where it was like, I can't remember who I was talking to, somebody on the Discord, where I was talking about what drew me to the Discord. And it was like, I had been in an evangelical church asking for something like this. Like, can we have a meeting where people can come from like all beliefs and just talk about stuff? And they were like, that sounds great, but like, let's just focus on the truth, And I'm like,
literally, it's like that's dangerous. It's like, don't bring those ideas in here. Yeah.
They said that in so many words, sort of like, oh, okay, yeah, but that's just really not. And so I was just like, whatever. And it was the first time I'm seeing people who are wanting to talk about the same things and engage in the same things. And so, I was a bit hesitant at first to like jump in. I've not been like, I mean, I watched like YouTube blogs and stuff when I was younger, and but never got really involved in those communities. So I'd been around that, like I'd been the lurker in some of these online communities, but never been a participant. And I'm pretty much an aspiring digital minimalist. So the fact that I spend so much time on a social media site is sort of funny, but yeah, just that engagement and that thing that is missing. And the whole estuary movement is so fascinating to me, because I think it's something that people inside and outside of the church crave, but they don't have any place to bring those things and work through those things positively. So yeah, Discord's been great. Paul's great.
Yeah, he's amazing. Yeah.
And he's just so generous with his time too. That was something he was like, that my first conversation with him, I'm like, it's kind of like crazy that you just I'm the one who came up with the term randos, like that you just talk to randos on the internet. Like, I don't think most pastors would do that. And he just laughed. He's like, I think this is what pastors should do. So the fact that he spends so much time talking to us is crazy.
He kind of gives me a lot of hope, because it was like in him and Paul, I found a lot of things that I was like, kind of just like, man, I wish pastors were this way, or I wish, Christians were more like this. And it was Paul just kind of like, he kind of gave me hope that there are Christians out there who are like that. So for some reason, yeah, Paul's had a really big impact on me. Like, I've watched literally hundreds of hours of his content, just kind of like passively in the background. I'm like, I cannot believe I'm watching so much stuff from this guy. Like, what am I doing? And it's like, why can't I just be a normal 25-year-old male and watch Joe Rogan or something? No, it's like, I gotta like listen to this niche pastor from California like just talk about these ideas. But I just couldn't stop. It was like, it's just so engaging, and he's so gifted at it. He's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, no, Paul's great. And the charm of what he does is just, it's just him, he's talking about these ideas, and he doesn't care if it's like polished or not. It's like, it's going to go out how it's going to go out. And there's something very real about that. But yeah, I mean, I always feel like an oddball and a weirdo when I have to explain it. I'm like, oh, so I'm part of this community that's online based off this like
I've explained it to people too, and they're just like, what are you a part of?
Yeah. So this pastor in Sacramento. It's like, oh gosh, like it doesn't even make sense. And trying to explain estuary is a whole nother thing, because I definitely want to be involved in whatever that is, and like trying to promote that in a more structured way. Well, maybe not structured, but just more substantial way. But yeah, I mean, and there's not, as you can tell, there's not a lot of women on the Discord. There are some, probably more than these other intellectual dark web Discords, but it's very it's very odd for people my age, my gender, to spend so much time thinking about philosophy and religion. But I'm like, I'm just leaning in and just going like, this is great. It's so life-giving.
You do you. Yeah. I think that's really cool, honestly. So
yeah.
I mean, even for it's even less common for women probably than men. But even I just think about most peers my age, and I'm like, most men my age are not thinking about like the deep questions of life, trying to understand life meaning and all of these things. And it's just like they're just kind of living day to day, and so it's like I feel kind of like an alien even amongst them. I'm like, not that I'm like superior or something. It's just kind of more like, God, I really don't know. Like, I just feel like we're on totally different wavelengths, you know? So yeah, it's a unique kind of niche group for sure.
Yeah. But I mean, just keep pursuing it, and like the people who are into that will find you. So like, I know you're talking about you've had a hard time finding people to talk to. I mean, the Discord's super helpful. If you're really struggling with some of that stuff, jump on the voice chats, connect with some people, like listen in, like it'll open up questions you didn't have and connect things you didn't even realize. But what I did when I was in Australia, because I'm going through deconstruction and all of this crap, and I just started talking to strangers. And like I could do that because I'm a foreigner, and I was, I think it was just that sort of like, people, who cares if people think I'm crazy? They don't know me here. I don't live here forever. So I would just go up and talk to people whenever I want to talk to somebody. I just go, oh, hi, how are you? Start a conversation. Got into a lot of really interesting conversations. And I sort of still do that. I'm weird. But yeah, I'll just talk to people, bars, people, I worked in a restaurant, and so a lot of times I would just hang out with the people that I worked with. We'd go to happy hour after our shift was done, and I'd just sit there and, they'd drink. I'd be like nursing my water, and we'd just talk philosophy. And like, it's, you gotta get out of your comfort zone, and just kind of, I had to teach myself how to have those conversations in like a productive way. It's just a lot of trial and error.
Yeah, dang. That's cool.
Yeah, but the Discord is a very forgiving place. And if you're really wanting to have those conversations and try to get better at that, the Discord's a really good place to start. And I feel a lot of us have come to the Discord and then take that energy out into the world, and it creates much more interesting dynamics within our own environments.
For sure. Yeah, I could probably do a better job. Of doing that, because I think I just got intimidated by the text chat. So, but even like what we're doing right now, like doing something like this, or I've talked with a couple other folks on there. Like I've talked with Job and a few others too. So just like continuing those conversations would be good for sure.
Yeah, I mean, and the Discord is sort of a time suck. You end up spending far more time on the Discord than you'd like. And so be careful, because you can definitely get sucked in a hole. but there's definitely a lot of people on there from all sort of backgrounds who want to think about these things in an honest way, which is, I think, sort of the biggest struggle that I've had talking with people in religions. I think there's just so much emotional investment in those religions that it's hard to have those questions be received in a way that's truly open. Not that they're not trying to be, I just think it just gets caught in that thing, and you have that faith, and it just have faith and push through, and God will reveal himself. And there's a piece of that that's true, like it does require some faith and sometimes pushing through those moments of doubts, but I don't think the avoiding the doubts is helpful. I think it's just gonna lead to more doubt. But yeah, I mean, working through those, if you can find people to work through those things, it's gonna make the journey a lot better. Unfortunately, that's not always the church body. I wish it was, and I think there are certain churches that do this sort of thing well, but there's a lot, especially in American Western Christianity, that doesn't do that. And so you gotta learn to be creative as you're continuing trying to walk that religious journey. And like if you're wanting to be a part of a church, it's hard to kind of walk that as you continue to pour into communities, but it can be done.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess I would love just to kind of get your insight on this. Okay. So a big thing for me, do I have the book here? No, it's in the other room. So a big thing for me has been like, okay, so what you were just talking about with doubt and like some of the fears of doubt because of your emotional attachment, or maybe like your just investment in the faith. I mean, that was kind of like, that's kind of the crossroads you kind of have to get to before you go down like a true path of like exploration, because you have to, in order to truly explore other viewpoints, you kind of almost have to open yourself up to being wrong and being proven wrong. Because if you go into it just like, no matter what happens, I'm going to keep my belief, it's like you're not really honestly like going into those questions then. Like and that's kind of the scary part, because it's like, oh man, that's way scarier actually. Like putting your own self on the line when you go in. But I think that was a point like I realized where it was like, it's not even worth, it's not worth a lot to engage with those questions if you're not willing to kind of lose what you have, if that's where it leads,
Yeah, no, I definitely had that same experience. I always thought it's like this counting the cost in a way that a lot of people don't talk about it. It's count the cost of Christianity, the things you have to give up. But in that same sort of that sword cuts both ways, right? Because on one hand, yeah, you got to count the things that you're giving up to chase this thing that you think is true. But like at the essence of like what God is truth, right? So if I'm going to follow God, I have to follow the truest form of that. And that might mean giving up this thing that gave me life and got me to God, to abandon that to get to a purer version of God.
Yeah.
And that's really scary.
It is scary.
And I think because I started with atheism, right? So I'm looking at it and I'm like, well, there's no point in looking at all of these other religions if atheism is true. So like, let me take it seriously,
Yep.
And so, it was a lot of that, like digging in philosophy and okay, let's for and against God, and a lot of the debates and the apologetics. And that was a stage of my life where apologetics was really big for me. And I did find a lot of it very helpful. There's me and Esther will talk about it all day long of the negative sides of some of those things, but I think at the end of the day, I do think it is a helpful tool for people to have if used in the right way as a tool.
Yep.
So it was a lot of that building, and I definitely had to do that moment where it's like, okay, there's a lot I lose to become an atheist. That conversation doesn't happen often. Like, my parents aren't going to disown me, but they're not going to be happy. Like, I was in a relationship at the time where, you know, it was leading to marriage, and we were saying that was the thing our life was built on, right? And if like I reject that, that creates a bad dichotomy here. You know, all of these other things, like the thing that gave me hope is God. Like, but I'm like, okay, all of that's on the line. I'm going to still pursue this question because knowing the truth to me is more important than feeling good. Now, I mean, at the end of the day, I did end up still believing in God and still having Christianity, but it was I mean, it was like a long road, and it was a lot of slugging through things and like really trying to get my mind around the concepts to see through some of the contradictions within the worldview. And yeah, I got to the point where it was like it would take more mental work and like mental gymnastics for me to be an atheist than it would be to be a theist. So like in one place that made me feel really good, but on another hand, it was always fighting that, well, is that just my bias? Or is it really is really true? And you know, it's just like keep turning those stones. Like eventually you just got to stop turning them because it'll drive you crazy.
Yeah, that actually, so a couple things on that. So first would be, I like how you kind of worded it with the sword kind of cutting both ways, because that's kind of one of the hypocrisies that I see with a lot of evangelical Christians, where it's like they want to have these conversations with people outside the church, but only to convince them of the truth, you know? So like most evangelical Christians don't go into those conversations with a desire to learn or even an openness to being proven wrong. Like they just kind of go in like, I'm just going to clobber you pretty much with the truth. And it's like, I think people outside of the church can sense that. Like people can tell when you're being, you know, if you're genuinely trying to understand them and are like open to hearing what they have to say. I think it will make them actually way more receptive to what you're telling them. But I think that's kind of some of the frustration I've seen is like, you know, we go into these conversations and we expect other people just to drop their worldview and their belief system to follow ours. Like, how can we honestly go in that conversation without us also kind of meeting them in the middle and say, like, let's have a dialogue. Like, let's both lay our belief systems down and just talk, you know?
Right. Well, I mean, I've done evangelical missions. I've been around the evangelical world, especially not this last year, but the 2 years previous. I was in a very evangelical church that was targeted at college kids. And so I'm going on these missions, and there's a lot of good things from those experiences. I don't regret those experiences, and I don't necessarily think that evangelicals are wrong to want to share their faith. It's an absolutely natural thing, especially if it has changed your life. If it's changed your life genuinely, why wouldn't you want to see someone else have their life changed? It makes sense. But what the trouble that I found, especially going out on those things, and what I would often say as we're doing these things to my other evangelical friends, you know, we're together here and we're sitting here trying to tell somebody the truth of Jesus as we see it. But let's say we're sitting across from two Mormon missionaries. How do we get to the understanding of like what is true? Because those two worldviews are very different. And how do we expect to ever change their minds if we're not willing to have our own mind changed?
Yes.
And that's where it becomes like, here, like, we're so eager, let me tell you the truth. And do I think Jesus is the truth? Yes. Do I think Christianity is the truth? 100%. But I've gotten that confidence not only from experience, which was how I came to faith and a big reason why I still hold my faith, but through engaging with others and really getting to an understanding of, you know, why I believe those things. And that's where I think the shift in evangelicalism could be better, if instead of just helping people find what they should believe, we really give them the tools to understand why they believe what they believe and how to do that better.
Yeah. And you're saying it's more than just handing them apologetics books.
Definitely. I mean, and that's a part of it. Like, and I've found apologetics books helpful. I've given people apologetics books that have been helpful. I've also given people apologetics books and they go, this sucks, and are really triggered. And like that's fair. Some of them are bad.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I just don't think that it's as powerful a tool as some people in the evangelical world want to claim it to be. Yeah, I was do you know who John Steingart is?
Yeah, the lead singer from Hawk Nelson.
So yeah, when he deconverted, my sister sent me some video of some lady talking about him, saying that he deconstructed, and he's such an interesting case. If you're not following John Steingart, you should. He's processing through this religious stuff in a way that is so much different than a lot of the people who are deconstructing, and I find it fascinating. But she sent me this video of this lady commentating on it, and was basically sort of going off about, like, this is why we need more apologetics in churches. This would stop all of this. And it's like, yeah, I mean, like, it'd be helpful if people knew why they believe what they believe. But you look at Rhett, and like Rhett and Link, they did have apologetics. And when we use apologetics as this way to build our way up to God, this Tower of Babel, intellectual God, it's not sufficient. And if we only allow the experience and the hype and the woo to take over everything about what we know about God, that's also not good. So there's a balance. And like, we need to stop seeing apologetics as the savior of Christianity, but as a tool. That makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. Nope, I completely agree with the balance thing. And it's so easy. You can just see people wanting to gravitate toward one end or the other, which is just I think it's just kind of human nature. Like, we always want to gravitate to the poles instead of kind of living in the middle, in the gray area.
Yeah.
For me with apologetics too, I think I was a double major in econ and history, and in my history degree, we were always told to read primary sources. It was always like, don't read the secondary sources, which is like what some other person had to say about what X event happened or whatever. But it's like, read a document, read the original document, like read the testimony of like the person who was actually there, not some like secondary source. So for apologetics, sometimes I get kind of frustrated because it's kind of like, it kind of creates the box of like, you're safe to think about these things as long as you only read like the apologists. Like, don't also read what the atheists have to say, like in their own words. It's like, trust what the apologists have to say about what the atheists say. And even William Lane Craig one time, who's like the apologetics Gandalf, pretty much, of the apologetics community. He one time I saw him like in an interview even saying, like, recommending people to read the Christian apologists kind of take on things and not really read like what they're don't actually read the atheist books. It's like, just read what the apologist has to say about the atheist books. And his thought process was that people aren't, I think his thoughts is like, people aren't like philosophically equipped, but like the average Christian, like if an average Christian just picked up like God delusion and just started reading it, it was kind of like this idea of like they wouldn't be able to handle it. So almost kind of like, you need to like it's like safer to read like what the apologists like kind of take is on it. And I was like, that never sat well with me, because I was like, no, like that's not how this works. Like,
Yeah,
it's like if I'm going to read what you have to say about it, I'm also going to read like what the actual, the counterpoint is. Like, let them speak for themselves. That always kind of rubbed me the wrong way when I heard him say that.
And it's actually surprising to me that he said that.
Yeah, and it wasn't like I don't think it really wasn't like we need to run from their ideas because they're evil ideas. It was more of kind of like
a protection.
The average Christian is not philosophically equipped to read Nietzsche or like something like that. So it was kind of like filter it through us, and we'll kind of help you process it. But it's kind of a slippery. I don't know.
I think for some people that's enough, but again, there's some people who don't even need apologetic. They don't need that, and
Right.
like. In some ways, I say I'm envious, although I don't actually wish I was.
I think I am actually envious. I am.
I mean, I think at the end of the day, I look at all the growth that happened from all of it, and I don't wish that I was still in that same place. But there's a part of me that's like, wow, that would be really nice not to have to deal with all the questions and the struggle of it. But that's what's growing your faith. That's what's making your ideas stronger. And like I don't think people should avoid reading anything. I think there's wisdom in reading it with others.
Mm-hmm.
Like I wouldn't go, hey, 15-year-old kid who's never known about anything about atheism, take the God Delusion and run off and read it by yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Like maybe like walk with him, ask him the right questions, like teach him those things. I mean, as far as new atheism, Christopher Hitchens was my first experience, and that one's not a lot of philosophical arguments. It's more, talking about violence and war that happens in religion, and some of the weird thing like food laws and all of these things, and it's just trying to undermine this idea of religion. It doesn't really go into any of the arguments of that. So for me, I still can read that book, and I haven't read it since that. It's been like 5 years, but I think I'd probably read it again and still be like, yeah, a lot of this is true. Like there is abuse of church and religion. No one's saying that there isn't. Well, some people are saying that there isn't, but I think the majority of people would say yes, those things can be used for negative purposes. But the truth is, so can any worldview. And that's just human nature. So we got to get outside of the evil that people perpetrate with those and try to get to, okay, well, how do we know it's true? So then Sam Harris was sort of the next one that I delved into, the moral landscape. Just sort of because that idea of using science to help us understand morals kind of resonated with me, because even as a Christian, and like in high school and college, I thought, well, if God asked me not to do something, there's probably a reason. And like we can probably look into like science or other things to kind of help us get to that way. So that was like, okay, it was interesting, but read that one and found the contradictions within that. But I read what's Science Mike McGrew.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, I read his book, and he talked about how the God delusion was that thing that like crippled his like faith. And so I was sort of nervous to kind of read that one. So I like waited a while, and then I finally was like, okay, I'll read it. And after reading through it, reading all of these other new atheists while I'm reading apologetic stuff, and I'm reading both, I realized, oh, this is not very good. Like these arguments are not very strong. And like, it just wasn't convincing to me. And so, but who knows if that was the first thing that I read, if it would have hit harder. But I think because I sort of did that work of like, okay, well, let me try to understand these arguments, in like the strongest way possible, take it really seriously. I started to kind of learn the rules of logic, how logic really worked, in a way that I'd never been taught before. So I'm in like YouTube University, just sitting trying to like watch everything I can. Like my friends thought I was crazy because they knew I was a Christian, and I would get into like sort of lively debates with people. I'm not the person like yelling or screaming really, but like sometimes they got a little like feisty. I'm a very feisty person. And so sometimes I'm like, I'm just like arguing certain points to like see the strength of them. And I had a friend down in Australia who was a militant atheist, and he enjoyed the same thing from the other side. And so we would just go back and forth, and like everyone else was like, shut up, like, oh, we don't want to hear this. And then like I would be in classes and I just have like Richard Dawkins YouTube stuff, and like as I'm editing and like just letting it go, just trying to listen as much as I could, or whoever. A lot of debates, because it kind of gave both sides, and I just did that until it got to the place where it was like I can't believe atheism. Like I really just can't believe, even if I wanted to. And so once I put that question away, it was like, okay, well now how do I decipher between these other religions? And so a lot of the work that I did, and what I'm most drawn to, is that epistemological philosophy of like how we know what we know, and how do we get to truth, and what are the different ways in which we can understand something's true, not just in a philosophical framework, because we have those rules and logic, but how do we do that in history? How do we do that in science? There's all of these different methods and ways to get to truth, and they're all different sort of measuring tools. And you can't just look at one to get the whole picture. You have to try to find the best one that makes sense of all of the data. And that's where I think some of this new atheism is so stuck on science, where it's like you're not looking at these contradictions in your philosophy in this framework of this scientism. And like I don't know why it is. I mean, I'm sure there's emotional and intellectual reasons why, but that's what gets sometimes hard, when people get stuck in that and you're trying to like, okay, we got to see past this, because you can't just look at science to tell you everything. It's just an insufficient mode. And like you're talking about using science to get to the crux of spiritual things, but it's not designed to do that. It's designed to look at the natural world.
Yeah, there's just some questions that science can't answer.
Yeah.
I mean, science, there are some things that science is very good at doing, but it's not a good idea to try to take that and then kind of apply science to be the answer to everything.
Right. And like we just need to acknowledge that. And I'm not saying don't look at science. Let's look at science. Let's have it teach us as much as it can, but let's know its limits, and let's give these other ways of uncovering truth some credit.
Yep. And for me too, the new atheists, I haven't read as much as you have, but just from the little bit I have read and from some of the debates, especially like Dawkins, like they're so condescending toward religion that it almost is like hard for me to take them seriously, because it's like they're just like hyper zooming on the most negative things they could possibly find in religion out of like the entire like swath of religious ideas and thinkers and all of the good things that religion like clearly brings to a lot of people, but it just tears all that down, and just like they hyper focus on a couple of like kind of fringe examples of things, or just like, so it's just almost hard for me to take it seriously, because it's like you're clearly so aggressive towards like they're so militant about it.
Yeah.
And they're so unwilling to concede even a little ground of like, well, maybe there are positives to religion. It's like, well, if there are any positives, like science can do the same thing but better. And it's just like I don't know. That always kind of like, it was always kind of hard for me. Now I know there are other atheists out there who are more nuanced.
Yeah, like Graham Oppie.
Yeah, who really okay, like, or even like Jonathan Haidt. I mean, he's an atheist, but he's really sympathetic to religion and thinks it's a good thing. So it's like those kind of thinkers, I'm like, okay, like I feel like I would respect their thoughts a lot more than like somebody who's just like blubbering on about whatever. So anyway, That's my 2 cents of the New Atheist as well. But
Yeah,
I haven't read it as probably as you have.
Yeah, I mean, you're not wrong. there's so much emotional stuff going on, and like there's several. I cannot listen to Lawrence Krauss. That guy drives me insane. I won't do
I'm trying
it.
to say if I'm gonna look him up. I don't know if I've listened to him. Lawrence.
Oh my gosh, he did like a lecture series with William Lane Craig where they did debates back and forth, and it was the most annoying several hours that I spent. I was just like, oh my gosh, he's a lot.
Really? Oh,
yeah.
I haven't seen. He's not familiar to me. I've got to check out those lectures or those debates sometime.
He's like he was a professor at ASU. I can't do Lawrence Krauss. Dawkins, I do think is very very stuck up in his ideas, and just not charitable. So he's not my favorite. Sam Harris is probably one of the ones that I can listen to a little bit more.
I would agree.
And Christopher Hitchens, but Christopher Hitchens is just so funny. He's very cutting. He's man, like there's something about him you can't not like him. But that's the thing, he's very rhetorically quick, but just because you speak well doesn't mean that your ideas are good.
It's true. That's very true.
And that's what I think what happens with a lot of new atheists. Like I always say, I think Sam Harris is too smart for his own good. He can talk himself into these ideas that on the face of them are just so, like the fact that you're a hard determinist but also a moral objectivist blows my mind. I'm like, how do you not see that that's like got a lot of contradictions that you got to wade through?
Right, for sure.
But yeah, so yeah, I get the dislike for them. I don't listen to them anymore. I don't hate them like some people do, but yeah, I get why people don't want to spend their time, just like I get why people don't want to spend their time with the apologetics. I think there's a similar spirit in the apologetics world that like I can tolerate like and be like, I'll listen to it, and like I see the problems and I will still appreciate that. But I mean, I just know a lot of new atheists too, and so I think it just, the more people who lie in that camp and find those things interesting, it humanizes it and makes it more like willing to engage, especially if that's what they want to talk about. Like, for sure, you gotta be adaptable in a certain way if you're really trying to get to truth.
For sure, definitely. So something else I want to talk to you about, you're just talking about the epistemology thing. So one of my big struggles has just been like, so you kind of go from a faith or a belief system kind of growing up where it feels a lot more certain. And it's like now, like when you go through a journey like this, I think I'm just realizing more and more, it's like you never really quite go back to the way it was before. Because like even if you land, let's say you land on something, it's like, because you've gone through this journey, you're so much more aware of just kind of like the complexity of all the topics, and that things aren't always quite so clean cut as like they first appeared. And I get really caught up in, I don't know if this, I'll explain it. You let me know if this makes sense. It's almost kind of like attachment issues, kind of like fear of commitment to like a belief system or idea, because it's like when you were so ingrained in something for a while and you step back and you're like, oh wow, I was so certain of it, and now there's so many things that like I'm not sure about with it. It's almost kind of like I'm kind of finding myself sort of waiting around, kind of afraid to commit to any type of like firm way of thinking about anything, because it's just like there's sort of like that kind of agnostic perspective of just like the world is so big and there's so much knowledge out there. There's no way that we can know enough to kind of land on anything. So I kind of like and commit, when you commit to an idea or a belief system, commitment commitment requires a cost of some sort, you know? So it's like, once you know, if you commit and say, okay, I'm going to follow Christianity, you know, it requires a lot of you in many ways. And like choosing to commit to it is a risk, because you're kind of now aware, I'm committing to something, I could be wrong about it. And there's no way that you can, and you know this, there's no way that you can exhaustively understand all the evidence and logic and arguments for and against every position out there. So at some point you kind of have to like accept, you have to find a way to accept uncertainty, and then like still commit despite the uncertainty. And I think I'm really struggling with that, because it's like I'm just so aware of all the uncertainty, and I just feel like I'm kind of stuck, because it's like I kind of want to keep, there's part of me that just wants to keep floating in the uncertainty and not commit to anything, because it's like, oh, then there's no risk if you don't commit to something. But then there's kind of there is a cost, I'm realizing more and more, to not committing to something, because then you're just kind of always agnostic about everything all the time. It's like, well, I don't really, you know, and it's hard to live your life in a meaningful way, or to, you know, I'm 26, so it's like, there's all these big life decisions of like, you know, what do you want to do for career? Like, who are you going to marry? Like, what's important to you? How do you want to live your life? It's like, just kind of being agnostic about the most important questions. I find it really hard to kind of meaningfully like make any progress on anything, because I'm just kind of always like, oh, I don't know. I just say I don't know to everything all the time.
Right.
So I guess what kind of tips do you have, kind of like, you know, how can you commit despite uncertainty? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Because I mean, I think that's the $1 million question. And that, I mean, there is a piece of that the answer is faith. You know, I believe that every single person, whether they're religious or not, lives by faith, because I don't think we can really have certainty about anything. And I define certainty in, 100%, knowledge, no questions. Faith is belief in something without absolute certainty. So I can have confidence in something, like Christianity, without having to have all of those questions answered, because there's no way I'm going to be able to answer all of those questions. But I could be in that same boat with atheism, where it's like, I have confidence in atheism. If I was an atheist, I still got a million questions, and I think someday science is gonna, tell me the answers, or but I'm still having a faith in this thing without having that 100% certainty. Now, that's where the weighing of the evidence does get us closer, where there are some things that, you have more reason to believe than others. I think looking at it in sort of like a judicial way, in that sort of perspective, like if you're in a court case and your best friend is, on charge for murder, and in your heart you're certain there's no way he could do that, right? There's no way that he could have committed that crime. Well, how do we know outside of our feelings? Well, we have to look at the evidence, and there's going to be inconclusive evidence. There's going to be things that can be manipulated in a way that, might get us to lean one side or the other. But like at the end of the day, as time goes on, like more will be revealed and more truth will come out, and the truth is going to stand, right? So like, as we're going on these journeys, we have these faiths, and it's okay. Like, we all believe things that are wrong. And if we don't, like, if we go our whole lives just trying to not believe something that's wrong, and refusing to commit to anything unless we can be certain about it, you're going to spin your wheels forever, and you're going to lose your mind. Like, you're literally going to drive yourself crazy. And so you've got to realize you have to just commit with the best evidence that you have. And like, that's all we can do, and be willing to say, if something can show me otherwise, I'm willing to adjust my belief. But like, let's say you're wrong about your faith. Can't you just say, oh, I found out I was wrong? Like, why is that a big deal?
Well, I can see what you're saying, but it really is a big deal when you, because you are making really big life decisions about these things. It's not just like, like for people, I mean, for some people, like religious beliefs are kind of a flippant thing in the sense that it doesn't make a big impact on your life. But for people who really live it out, it's like living it out has a huge impact on you. So there's that higher investment, so it's like, then that's where there is a cost. It's like kind of like we were just saying, like for people, why it's so hard for them to actually honestly like consider if they're wrong about their beliefs is just that they have so much sunk cost in the belief, so it's like they just don't want to be wrong. So it's like, does that make sense?
Totally. And you're right. Like, I don't mean to sound flippant about it, because I do think we should take these things seriously. I think you've got to, like, if there's questions, ask them. But like, I mean, when I came back to faith after I did all those questions, like I still believed in God the whole time. And like, I still claimed Christianity and Protestantism, but I was willing to say, but I don't know, I could be wrong. So let me look at this and look at it. And I could acknowledge, well, I do believe in the core of myself that this is true, but like, how do I know outside of that feeling? And I just kept saying, it was an honest, rigorous look into myself saying, what do I actually believe? And let me challenge those things and try to prove myself wrong. And if I prove myself wrong, great, I believe this new thing. And like, you just got to do the work, and it's hard work. But I think if you really want to know the truth, you just got to be on the journey. Don't just be patient with it. You don't have to know everything all at once. Just you're gonna drive yourself crazy doing that. Like, you just got to be willing to be open and engaged. And like, I think that God works in a way where sometimes he hides certain truths from you until you're ready to hear them. And so when I came back to Christianity, I went back to what I now call default Protestantism, where it's like, I knew enough about like the certain Catholic perspectives that I couldn't quite feel myself, feeling like I believed those. I had nothing against Catholicism. I mean, I'd had a little bit growing up of that, oh, Catholics, they believe this stuff without knowing it, but I never saw it as like a negative thing. I was like, oh, Catholics, and going through that journey, learned a little bit about it and was like, they're just things that don't seem quite right with me for Catholicism. So I just went back to Protestantism. But I had that same feeling that you did, where it was this, I always say it's like I went through the looking glass, and now I'm going back to churches in this evangelical, non-denominational world where it used to be great and it used to be so comfortable. And now all of these things feel tainted and they don't feel quite right. And I'm trying to like be a part of it and think about it better, but it's just not the same. And I walked that road for a long time. And, God finally took me to a place where I realized, hey, this evangelical thing that I'm doing, it's taking a toll on you more than you think. And like, that opened the door to say, okay, well, maybe I'll be open to like going to a different church, like see a different body of believers. And then in that moment, it's like Orthodox after Orthodox after Orthodox kept like coming into my life. And eventually one of them was like, well, why don't you just go to an Orthodox service? And I was like, okay. And in my head, I'm thinking, I'm probably not going to like it. I've been to Catholic Mass. I never connected with it. It's just, I don't know, but like, I'm open to it. Like, it's interesting. I don't know anything about Orthodoxy. And I go to this Orthodox service and have this experience that I can't explain. And it left me to the point where I not rejected, but at least stopped calling myself Protestant and was willing to explore Orthodoxy. And I'm telling you, if 3 years ago I had gone into that Orthodox church and I had that experience, I wouldn't have been able to embrace that and move into that. I needed that journey to get me to the place where I could have this experience and chase that experience to kind of find truth. And as I'm having this experience of orthodoxy that just feels so different than any other religion that I've explored, I start digging. And the more that I dig, the more that I'm like, wow, this stuff makes a lot more sense than Protestantism ever did. And it did make sense to me. But this stuff makes more sense. And, you know, I'm still going slow with it. I think I'm gonna start the catechism process, but I haven't started it yet. And that's the beauty of orthodoxy. It's very much, you know, the church is always here, seeker sensitive. The one thing that really got me interested in orthodoxy is when the priest came up and started talking to me. He talked a little bit about orthodoxy and the history and the church, and then he just turned to me and was like, well, what do you want to know? And that was something so refreshing that didn't always happen in the Protestant churches I went. It was more, hey, we got a membership class, let us tell you what we believe. But you know, it was just a different thing. And now maybe 6 months down the line, I won't be on orthodoxy anymore. I don't think that's true. I think it's gotten me closer to God, but I think everybody's on that journey. And like, you just got to be patient with that journey. And I would say, be honest with yourself and really look at, okay, well, what are the emotional reasons that are stopping me from committing to this? And is that a good thing or a bad thing? Or is there an emotional reason that's making me want to jump into something? That's not good either. Like, so you really have to learn how to be very emotionally honest with yourself. And, you know, it takes a lot of work, and we lie to ourselves all the time. But that's something that I had to do. I mean, even with orthodoxy, there were things that I think stopped me from committing to it as quickly, just because of the implications of what that would mean. You know, just this, I mean, especially with this idea of, you know, marriage, like, okay, well, I'm already got all of these things that create a difficulty finding a person that's suitable. But let's add orthodoxy on top of that. That would be something really difficult. But you know, I kind of got to the point where I was like, well, that's a stupid reason not to like join a religion. And so I'm still doing my due diligence and making sure that there were other emotional reasons that were very good that made me take it slower. That I'm, you know, that I'm glad that I have taken the time. But like, yeah, I think if you keep turning the stones your whole life, like, you forget to look up and see, oh, hey, there's a lot of beauty here, and like, like, experience that.
For sure. That's really interesting. Everything you just said was very interesting. So yeah, and that's where I think I'm almost so emotionally aware of myself. So this is the problem I run into. I think I'm so aware that it's almost kind of like crippling and like keeps me from moving forward, because it's like for any given proposition, it's like I could tell you emotional reasons that would lead me to faith and emotional reasons that lead me away from faith. I could tell you intellectual reasons that would lead me to faith and intellectual reasons that would lead me away from faith. So it's like there's all of these kind of like competing voices going on, trying to kind of say, well, this is the voice you should follow, or this is the one you should listen to, because a lot of them are contradict each other and tell you different things. So it's like, that's where I think I'm getting lost, because it's like, you know, at some point you have to commit and pick something and live it out, which is what I agree with. But it's like, I'm having a hard time even working through all of that, because I can kind of talk out of both sides. I can kind of talk to both sides at any time. Like, so I just feel so divided internally. That, and it's like and that's the problem with the more that I try to learn, or the more that I research and like learn things, it feels like it doesn't get more clear. It actually just gets muddier. Like it gets more, you're just adding more and more voices and more complications to it, which is like making it even harder to move forward. So it's like,
you need to get out of your own way.
That's my struggle right now a little bit. Or it's like where, that's another point, is like, where's the balance between being open-minded and also like emotionally, like mentally and emotionally healthy, like for yourself, you know, because there is a point where asking these questions and always exploring these things all the time can actually can really mess with you in a lot of ways. So there's got to be kind of like a healthy way to explore it. And I don't know if you took Peterson's Big Five personality test, but I took it, and I'm really high in openness and neuroticism.
Okay.
And that combination is kind of like, the openness is like always wanting to explore. Like if there's a doubt or if there's a contradictory idea, you can't let it go. Like you, like
I
you're
must
open
be
to
those
exploring
two.
it. But the neuroticism is like the anxiety. That's like
Okay.
like you get scared and anxious about considering other perspectives, but you also can't stop doing it because you're just so curious and you're so Paul is high in openness but low in neuroticism. He said that before. So he loves exploring ideas, but it doesn't really like make him anxious or worried or like keep him up at night. He's not like worried about a lot of these things, like in the same way that somebody like me, it's like these questions are really hard for me to work through. So it's like, that's where I'm stuck in those feelings and stuck in my inner dialogue is so complicated at any given time.
Yeah.
That it's kind of like, it's hard to know, you know, which one to follow. And that's part of where the commitment thing, I guess, comes in, because when I was kind of more in my Christian days, it was like, even at that time, your brain and your consciousness is always very complicated, you know, but it's like at that time, you kind of had the assumption always that, well, the Christian kind of impulse is the right one. So that's like the one that you should try to favor, or the one that you should try to follow. Granted, you know, you're not ever perfect, but you at least kind of had a framework for filtering through different thoughts or feelings and ideas. They kind of filter through that Christian frame. But it's like when you don't really have a frame, it's like, okay, I don't even know how to sift through these ideas anymore. Like it's such a disorienting place. So I don't know if any of that makes sense.
Oh,
or
no,
if you've experienced anything like that. Okay.
It makes a lot of sense. I'm similar in a lot of ways. I don't know. I haven't taken the Big Five. I know I am high in openness. I've taken Myers-Briggs, so I know I am higher openness. I don't know where I would lie on the neuroticism. I don't think I'm generally very neurotic, but when I was going through those big questions, I was probably higher in neuroticism than I generally am, but I wouldn't say I'm a generally very anxious person. But I definitely resonate with some of that, you know, that anxiety and that trying to figure out those questions, and that all of this information overloading your brain and not being able to think about it clearly. I think a couple years ago, I had an experience in like a religious community where it was this like boot camp intensive of like spiritual growing. And I could tell for myself that I was like, I need to have a timeout where I'm going to get sick. And I tried to time out, but the way that it was structured, I really didn't have the ability to. And it was sort of like, I just got to submit to authority here and just push through. And I ended up, they're like, you just go to church, it'll be good for you. I'm like, okay. And so I go and end up getting sick. And that experience sort of helped me realize, you know, when you're being fed, it's good, right? You gives you strength. But when you overeat, you're gonna throw up everywhere. And it's the same thing with information. Like, to be fed and keep your mind growing is great. But if you're overfeeding that, like, it's going to create complications, and it's not going to be able to stick in your brain, and it's all just going to spew out in negative ways. And so you got to really learn how to be disciplined and say, okay, I need to set this book down and go for a walk and think about these things. And I think you're at the point where my suggestion would be, put the information down, take some time to process it, and start learning people's stories. I think that's where you're going to have a switch. And a book that I would recommend is Searching for God Knows What by Donald Miller.
Okay.
I think that is sort of a look at religion that I found very helpful, and it gets outside of this sort of strict information. But he talks in that book, and there's several different parts of it, but at the beginning, he kind of talks about how Christianity often gets put in this formula, and we want these simple 3-step formulas to get to knowing God better. But God doesn't work in formulas like that. He doesn't work in the box, and knowing God is much more like growing relationships than it is going through a formula. And that kind of shifts your mind of like, hey, this is not just, you think about it in like, oh, okay, you're dating a person. You can look at their dating profile and look at all of the things they like and know all the facts and figures, but that's not going to get you anywhere. Like, you've got to go meet the person and get to know them and see if those things are compatible. And like, look at religion that way, right? Like, when I was going through my exploratory phase and was back into religion and like believed in, like, had confidence in a belief in God, I was going to all different types of churches. I went to the Mormon church and talked to them for a long time. I went to a Pentecostal church. I went to a Baptist church. I did a 7 Days Adventist Bible study once, just like really trying to get a sense of, okay, well, what is this really? And like, I think outside of just religious organizations, like if God is a personal God, which I do believe he is, like, ask and you will find, seek, you will find, ask and the door will be open to you. Like, pray, ask those things, just be like, and it doesn't have to be even to like the Christian God, if that's not a frame that you can fit in. It's like, hey, God, if you're real, like wherever you are, just reveal that to me, and just keep praying that. And I think as you do that, God will start stripping away those things and help you get clarity. And you just got to be patient with it and realize that sometimes that struggle that you're going through, you need it to teach you something. But, I think when it comes to truly knowing God, there's something to thinking of it more as a relationship than strictly a list of theologies and histories that we have to know.
Sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And the dating profile was a good example, because you can only really know so much about somebody just by like analyzing propositional statements about them. Like at some point you have to actually meet them and and get to know them. So I think that
sometimes people can put a good foot for a long time, and then there's a turn, and that's like, and you got to be sensitive to those things. And that's the same with religion, and I think that there's me problems and there's church problems, right? And that's another world that you have to be like, okay, so what about this is me? What about this is me being bothered by these things? And what is like a problem in the church that might be able to be fixed?
Yeah.
And like, you got to start with yourself, right? Plank in my own eye before the sawdust. So just be like, okay, well, how can I engage in this honestly? And be ruthlessly honest. That's all you can do. And like, some church communities are not going to like that. They're going to feel uncomfortable. Get used to uncomfortability, because the truth is often uncomfortable. And like, that's the thing. I'm very high in openness, but low in agreeableness. So I think for me, I'm very open to like, oh, okay, let me learn about this. Let me talk about this, but I'm not easily convinced necessarily. And so there's good and bad to that. But I think just look at it like, hey, you're not trying to please these people outside. Like, you've got to be honest with yourself, because if you're not honest with yourself, you're never going to be able to engage in the world in a productive way.
For
And
sure.
And that's what's missing in a lot of American churches, where it's more the perception of holiness and the perception of having everything together versus being what a church is supposed to be, is a group of believers trying to move towards something and better, towards something better and having that good life and living in that upside down kingdom.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, I think, yeah. That's where I gotta, yeah, it's that, yeah, it's the being honest with yourself, but it's, yeah, it's kind of, it's like being able to discern the voices inside of you and kind of being able to figure out where they're coming from and kind of what they mean, and
Yeah. Well,
being
and
able to sift through those.
the thing that I think is a huge reason why God asks us to be a part of church bodies is because to do that well, we need others to come along with us. And there are some people who,
Yeah.
you know, they think that they can see like what's underneath, and sometimes they're wrong. But I know in my personal life, there are people, if they tell me something about myself, I'm willing to listen to them because they're usually right at the end of the day. And you got to find those people to be able to cut through your own BS, like,
Yeah.
because we're very good at it. And if we're doing it all alone, it's much easier to get caught up in our own little world and crafting the world that's comfortable for us. Like, we need other people to be along in that journey to help us get there.
For sure. Yeah, that's where the Discord community can come in and be a help as I talk to people. And
yeah. There's seriously great. I mean, I know you've already talked to some people, but like Luke went through a similar situation. Jeff loves C.S. Lewis. He's great. Sherry is always great to talk about certain things. There's just so many people. I mean, even Ginger Bill would be good because he's not in a place where he is even comfortable with the idea of God and liking that, but he feels forced to believe it. And so that's just a different perspective that's kind of interesting, where it's like, I don't want to believe it, but I have to. And, you know, that's
interesting. Yeah.
You should talk to Ginger Bill. He's got an interesting story because he grew up atheist. And so he always loved atheism, and now he's finding problems with it. And so he's got a really interesting story. He's usually on the Friday Q&As and stays pretty late. So if you can get in on one of those, tell him I sent you.
Okay, sounds good. I usually listen in on those actually most weeks. The past couple of weeks I haven't, but I usually try to put them on in the background.
Yeah, well, I'm telling you, the best thing about the Friday Q&A sessions is the after session. When sometimes Paul stays now, but when Paul's done with his Q&A and people just start engaging, that's where some of the best conversations happen, because it brings all the people out and we all start just sharing and building on those ideas that Paul talked about. So definitely jump in on some of those, because I think it would be really helpful. And, you know, the watch parties too, those have been good. And that's pretty new to the community.
For sure. Yeah. So, yeah, I know there's not like a magical fix to it. It's probably just going to be more processing and finding ways to work through it, you know, or maybe in conversation with people.
Yeah, but take a break from the information. Just take a pause. It just becomes an obsession, and then it's like you're reading for nothing. It's not helping. Like, you need time. Like, your brain is designed to need time after you have big conversations or do big things, to have some free space to process those things. So give yourself that space. Like, if you read a book for an hour, go for a walk for at least a half an hour, get off your phone, disconnect, let your brain process those things, and it's going to be more helpful.
Yep, for sure. So even for you, kind of as you're going now in this path that you're on, how much self-doubt do you have? You know, like, do you ever have moments where you're just like, well, the only reason that I'm even sticking with this Christian stuff because that's how I was raised, you know? Or like, do you have moments where even you now, kind of on the other side of it, do you ever feel like those moments of self-doubt or like questioning things, or maybe I didn't explore X thing well enough? Maybe there is, are you just caving to some other kind of pressure that's leading you go down to this path? Not saying that's what's happening, but do you ever have those kinds of thoughts? Or are you like confident enough kind of in your path to know, nope, this is the right path for me right now, and I'm on kind of like the journey I should be on?
Well, I do feel very confident, and I do feel very confident that I'm on the right path and the right journey. There's still sometimes questions, but I don't think that they're worrisome anymore. They're kind of fun, where it's like, well, let me think.
God.
Let me
That's
think.
very different than how I view it, but they're not.
Well,
they're not. They're
well,
not.
I'm a little farther ahead than you. They didn't always used
Yeah.
to be fun. But like I've kind of gotten to the perspective of like, hey, I get to be on this journey and I get to research these things. And like sometimes I can get in spirals, but honestly, since I found orthodoxy, no, I have not had the doubts that I used to have. I mean, that's a whole nother story, but there were some things that I went through that actually kind of burned that out of me. So this like skepticism and questioning and like constant doubt, I don't feel much anymore. And maybe it'll come back down the line, but since finding orthodoxy and participating in orthodoxy, I haven't had as many of those doubts. I mean, I still talk to people about religion. I mean, I in the last 3 weeks, I've had a phone call every week with a group of Mormons, and yeah, their pitch is not very convincing to me, but I sit there and I'm open to it, and I'm willing to be persuaded, and I'm able to share, okay, well, this is what I'm experienced with orthodoxy, and like tell me how I've had this experience here. How do I know which one is true? Because you're telling me if I just pray and read the Book of Mormon, I will find out that it's true. But I've done that for several, not consistently, but I've done that and multiple times throughout the years, and I always get the answer, no, it's not true. So how do we do those things? And so for me, it's less of a worry. And I think because of just the way that orthodoxy is and the patience with it, that's helpful too. Like where I haven't felt obsessive, like I need to get to the bottom of this. It's like, I want to know, but like I'm taking my time. And orthodoxy is very much about the participation of like, to know orthodoxy, just go to liturgy, be around the people, read about the saints, and that will help you get a fuller picture of what it is. And I think there's a lot of wisdom to that. So I'm definitely in a better place. But of course, I'm always going to have questions, and there's still questions about orthodoxy that I don't understand. But part of that's like, I'm not going to have every answer, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And like, I think I probably will convert, but I'm willing to say, I'm willing to say if I can find something that isn't right about it, that doesn't make me feel comfortable, I'm not going to commit. And orthodoxy is good for that, because they give you that option, and they don't think that everybody should convert. So at least that's what my priests have said.
Yeah.
So
that gets back to the just kind of being okay with uncertainty, like learning to live with uncertainty, because like you said, you're never 100% certain of anything. So it's kind of like an inner emotional kind of battle that you have to be able to kind of learn to accept. Is just that we live, you'll never make, we're circling back to that right now, but it's like you can't really operate in the world if you just don't commit to anything ever, because you'll never be certain of anything, so it's like, I think I just got to keep bringing myself back to there, because I just keep on getting, well, I don't really know for sure, or like, oh, that, this could go that way if I'm not expecting it. I'm just like so hyper aware that it's paralyzing.
Yeah.
So it's like, you just got to keep coming back to kind of like, you have to act, like you need to, because I'm a person, if I don't keep moving, I will get caught in the thoughts and just spiral, and like and I'll stop moving. So it's like, there needs to be, I think for me, like at this point, there has to be some kind of like action that I need to take, or like some kind of a commitment or something, just to kind of get me outside of just thinking. Because like you were saying, like maybe I'm at a point where it's too much processing of thoughts, and like time to maybe take a different approach to it, because at some point it can become too much.
Yeah, well, and here's the thing, like, we think we're in control of our brains. We don't have as much control as we think. And like, I experienced this myself, where like you can lose those capacities and the way that you think in a second. And so like, treat those things with respect and realize, hey, this is a gift that I get to do these things, and that's helpful. I think that this is just part of your journey and you're going through it, and I don't think it's necessarily a wrong thing, but anything taken to its extreme becomes a weakness. And
That's a good point.
Take that sort of processing too far, you will break down and you will spiral, even if you're trying to keep moving. Like, there's just no way. And sometimes it's not about going and doing more. It's like, let's pull back and rest, because that rest is what's going to give me that energy to continue on and not crash. Like, sometimes you need those moments to do those things. So, I mean, if I were you, I'd probably, you're not going to be able to stop totally looking at things. That's just in the season you're in. Just don't force yourself to do things. Just get drawn to the things that are salient, and try asking a lot of questions about, okay, well, what do you believe and why? And just try to understand people more, because the more that we can understand people, the easier it becomes to wade through ideas and why certain people believe different things compared to others. Like, people are important in that. And that's a huge step that I think can often be missed in some of this hyper rational conversation. And like, listen, your culture is working against you in a lot of ways. You're American, you grew up evangelical Protestant. All of these things you're talking about are very ingrained in those cultures, and things that I've had to work through myself. Just be patient with it and just realize, okay, this is part of my wiring, and like, I don't need to rip out the whole circuit board to like continue. Like, acknowledge it and make tweaks as you go, and just say, okay, well, I'm going to start processing this differently, or think about this differently, and like, I'm going to take steps to try to do these things better. And like, I think for each individual, there's different things at different times. Like, sometimes it is the thing you need to be doing is reading, but I think it sounds to me like at this point, what you need to be doing is stepping back and like giving that space to process. And like, definitely don't feel like you have to commit to something right away. Like, God is working, and like, when he's ready to make you feel confident about something, like, I think you'll know.
When you know, you know.
I guess so. Yeah, that's what they say, huh?
Yeah, well, it's kind of like, there's a lot of similarities with, we were talking about the dating thing before, but there's kind of a lot of similarities with that, because it's like, people say that all the time. It's like the most annoying thing when people say that. I'm like, well, when you know, like, when people are going back and forth about, well, should I get married to this person? It's kind of like a similar, not exactly the same, but it's that whole commitment idea, and making a big commitment to something where there's a lot of investment, and you're like trying to weigh the options, and then getting caught in analysis paralysis thinking about it. So,
well, and I think if you read the Bible, like, you see that this whole idea of like marriage and that reflecting God is so deeply ingrained in those writings. So I think that makes sense that we would see that reflection.
For sure.
And it's just such a balancing act with all of it. And I think just be a little more gracious with yourself and say, it's okay if I don't know anything, and be open with others, because you want to know what's true. Like, and that's not a scary thing. If you're believing what's true, like, you don't have to be afraid, and like, it'll bring peace. And all you can do is try your best to hold things that are true. And you can say, like, even if you're not certain about something, you can say, well, if I'm honest with myself, I believe this is true. I might not know exactly why, but I believe it. And like, I'm trying to figure out why better. That's all you can do.
For sure. That's a good point, because I think I maybe do I think I maybe do know better that I'm alluding to of things that I believe, but I like almost, I feel like sometimes I have to have a rational explanation for everything, like why I believe the things that I do. And it's like sometimes there's just things that are there, you know?
Elephant in the rider, man. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I get it. I'm the same way. And especially I think coming from new atheism and seeing those criticisms and not wanting to have a blind faith, it can get that where, well, I need my rational reasons. I need all of this. And it's like,
Yeah.
those are good and those are helpful. But for me, that's not what makes God real for me. What makes
Mhm.
God real for me is the experience. And what makes me confident in those experiences is the outside information. And so
Sure.
that's how I try to look at it too, where it's like all of life is an experience. Your experience of reading that information is a subjective experience. Like
Right.
at the end of the day, you could be like just a brain in a vat and you think you're doing all of this and we'd have no
Mhm.
way to prove that, you know? So just
For
like,
sure.
just, it's okay. Sometimes we inherently know things without knowing why. And like, just
Sure.
if you're trying to be honest with yourself, your gut your gut is good to follow and it'll teach you things. Just be honest
Yeah.
with yourself and just be willing to like to trust your gut to an extent and learn from that. Like you know, we're all learning how to decipher our senses and like
Yeah.
it's just part of the journey.
For sure. Oh, that's good. I think I needed to, yeah. I think I needed to give myself permission to do that. Like to, yeah. Ooh, that's good. Yeah. The trust the trusting your gut thing, like being okay with trusting your gut even if you don't have like full rational explanation for it is good.
I think,
That's
yeah.
good.
I mean,
And
sometimes your gut's wrong.
yeah. Oh yeah.
Sometimes your gut's wrong. But
Yeah.
what I think inside of that, it's like the and from what I've done, I've been unpacking a lot of this because through all of this, and especially last year, I've had to kind of gain more confidence in my gut again and like be willing to trust it. My gut usually wasn't wrong. My interpretation of the gut instinct was usually more wrong than the feeling itself. And so that's
Mhm.
where I think we can be a little bit more you know, unconfident, where it's like, okay, I have this feeling and this is what I think it is, but I'm not going to say that with like certainty necessarily, but that's how I feel. And like time will
Yeah.
tell if I'm right about that. But usually the guts feelings are acknowledging something important.
Mhm.
What that will lead to, just be patient with yourself and time will tell.
For sure. For sure. Yeah. Yeah. And at the end of the day, I mean, this is kind of, I think, where part of the new atheist kind of frame breaks down, is just that people aren't just like pure rational creatures, you know, like so much, we're much less rational than I think the new atheists like to make us out to be.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's okay. You know, that's
Well,
part of the beauty, I think, of what makes us human, is that we're not just like robot calculators all the time, just like crunching thoughts, you know, and calculations. It's like there are feelings and there's experiences and there's relationship and all these other things. What are we gonna say?
it's like a control mechanism, I think, where it's like if I can think rationally, and if I can put all of those things together, I have a little bit more control of the world around me, and I don't have to feel like I'm being tossed around by these emotions.
Mm-hmm.
But it's this false sense of confidence, and it's
Mm-hmm.
learning that yes, we can think rationally. We do have this capacity, but there's also this other side, and to live on either extremes just not going to be fulfilling. You got to find a way to marry these things.
For sure. For sure.
Yeah.
Dang.
Well,
That's
any
all really
other
good stuff.
you got
That's
any
kind of
other
all I have.
questions?
I think that's okay. I think that's it for today.
Okay.
That's enough to chew on, I think. But yeah, thanks for talking though. I mean, I
Yeah.
really appreciated it. And I actually really loved, like, I'd heard one other video with you in it. The one that really stuck out to me was the Rhett and Link one,
Mm.
because you're talking about deconstruction, you're talking about apologetics, you were talking about kind of like the evangelical culture that they're from, and I was like, all of that was just ringing so many bells for me, because it was like, that's all lining up with exactly kind of like where I'm at, or like the background I've come from. So I was kind of like a fly on the wall listening to you and Esther. I was like, this is such a good conversation. Yeah. And actually, so I listened to it once and I loved it. And I was like, I got to go back and listen to it again. So I went back to listen to it a second time, and it wasn't on YouTube anymore. Like, it was like taken down or something. So I literally messaged Jeff and was like, dude, I really want to watch that video again. And I don't know, I messaged Luke and he messaged Jeff, and I was like, can you put that video back up? Because I really want to listen to it. And they put it back up again. So I don't know if you knew about that, but I was that person who was like, I want to watch it again.
Well, that's how I figured out who you were, because I had asked Jeff to take off all my randos conversations because I was about to launch the podcast, and I didn't want to go through all the other stuff, and I just want to be more conscious of what was out there. So I just asked him to take them all off. And then like literally that was 2 days before you were looking for it again. And Jeff's like, hey, can I make this unlisted for him? I'm like, that one's fine. Just make it public again. So yeah. Mm-hmm. So yeah, but I love talking to Esther. She's such an interesting bird. But yeah, I mean, that's what I grew up with, this evangelical Christian non-denominational culture. And so it's kind of weird now talking about it because I don't identify that way anymore. So I sort of feel sensitive criticizing it, whereas before, when I was a part of it, I felt like, well, I'm a part of it, so it's like my self-realization. But now that I'm outside of it, I sometimes try to be more cautious about the things that I say with it. But I think there's a lot of people who feel that what's the right word? Just the draining nature of some of that. So yeah, but I mean, yeah, it's very interesting. And that's the crazy thing too. I'm actually think that I'm a very emotional person. I don't think I'm necessarily more of like the rational analytical person, but like there's this duality in myself where it's like I think through going through this deconstruction, I found that, I used to think because I was so emotional, it stopped me from thinking rationally. But I realized in some ways, because I'm so in tune with my emotion, it helps me think clearer through some of these things. And so it got really, it got me excited to kind of learn these things. So now I can find myself in this sort of hyper rational mode that is not necessarily me, but I go into that mode and like I put on my atheist lens and I say, well, if this, then so it's sort of a weird place to be, because I did not used to be this way. But, I think I'm better for it. I think I needed to go through all of it to get where I am, and it makes me better at everything else. Like taking these religious questions seriously and working through all of those things, I've seen how it's made me better at everything else that I do. Yeah. So like it's going to produce good fruit. And like, I think that's the thing that you need to really look at. Like, and if you're going to take anything from Christianity, like, what the fruits of the Spirit, like, what am I doing? Are they producing those things? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. If it's not producing those things, I'm probably not doing something right. And so like I'd have to adjust to like get to those things, and that'll get me closer to God.
For sure. Oh, that's good stuff. Yeah. Sheesh. Well, thank you for talking today. I really appreciate it.
Sure.
You're generous with your time. Talking to some stranger from Wisconsin for 2 hours.
I spend all of my days talking to strangers. It's some of the most enjoyable things that I like to do. So no problem at all. I mean, yeah, I'm on the Discord a lot. So feel free to reach out or like, jump into a conversation or anything. This is fun for me. So it's not a bother.
Yeah, that's good.
Thank you so much for watching. I have Michael's original Rando's conversation with Paul Vanderklay and some of the links that we mentioned below in the description. So if you want to check that out, please do. But for now, I will leave you with Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.